Hello, everyone, and welcome. This channel narrates the life stories of our viewers from all around the world. To protect individuals' privacy, names are sometimes altered in these stories. Hello, my name is Michael, and my family has always been one of those families that never put too much pressure on their kids or set strict limitations. While this was good in some ways, it also meant that I became a boy who was always independent, making my own life decisions. Since I was still young, this sometimes led me to make wrong decisions and I didn't have good guidance. I had an older brother and sister, both of whom married young. Even though my brother was married, my father couldn't work, so he had to help support the household. When I grew older and was in high school, I decided to work myself. Being a perfectionist, I always wanted the best in my life, even though my mother often advised me that there are more important things in life than money, and that if you lose those, no amount of wealth will make you happy. From that age, I worked alongside my studies and started working in a barber shop. I did my job well, and being a clever boy, I earned a good salary. As a teenager, I also had my share of mischief. There were several girls in the neighborhood who liked me, and although they were girls, they were willing to come forward and ask me out. However, none of them appealed to me, and I only maintained a relationship with them for fun. When I got into university, my hard work in studying paid off, and my family was surprised when I got accepted. They had thought I would end up like my brother, dropping out of school to find work, but instead, I was determined to focus seriously on my studies, although I still enjoyed my job. During university, I had short conversation and friendships with many girls, but none of them caught my interest until I met a girl named Elika. Unlike the other girls, she didn't warm up to me quickly, which I found intriguing, so I pursued her and tried to connect with her, even knowing it would be a challenge. I worked hard to get close to her through studying together and eventually got her number. At some point, I felt she liked me, so I tried to suggest having coffee together to strengthen our connection. Eventually, we became like close friends. When I sensed that she was also interested in me, I asked her to be friends. She initially rejected my first offer, saying she was afraid of getting too attached and not being able to separate easily later. To reassure her, I told her my intentions were serious and that I wanted our relationship to lead to marriage. After hearing that, she said she would think about it and let me know. That day, she spoke so seriously that I felt disheartened and doubt she would accept my friendship or even maintain our previous connection. However, a few days later, she texted me saying she was ready to start a healthy relationship. I was constantly thinking that I had achieved good results and found a girl who was healthy and loyal. Elika had a very positive appearance, which showed that she was a down-to-earth girl. Once Elika agreed to our relationship, we began going on romantic dates and our emotional connection developed. After a few months, I became very attached to her and decided to take our relationship more seriously. I told her that if her family was okay with it, I would like to propose to her. She, knowing me well by then, agreed and gave me her family's contact number. My mother called them and they arranged a meeting for the proposal. I was very stressed, worrying that her father might oppose me since Alika was the only daughter and, as she had told me, was very dear to her father. I went to Alika's house to propose, and since both of our life situations were similar, We decided to live on our own after the marriage. Therefore, there was a 1 month gap between our engagement and wedding. Since we were going to handle everything for the dowry and setting up the house ourselves, things moved along quickly. After 2 months, we moved into our own place. At first, like every other couple, our life was full of love. Since we had already developed feelings for each other, things went smoothly, and we became much closer than before. After a few months of marriage, Elika, being a social person, had many friends. However, I only knew 3 of them, and I was in touch with those 3. After a while, Elika told me she wanted to make some changes to her appearance. Since I was someone who preferred simplicity, I tried to convince her that she was already beautiful the way she was. But Elika had already made up her mind and wanted a big change. Since it was the beginning of our life together, I didn't want to oppose her, so I agreed to her decision. Gradually, she changed both in appearance and behavior. She wasn't the calm girl I had married anymore. She started behaving like an 18-year-old girl. Despite that, I trusted her completely, so I didn't question her actions. I kept telling myself I shouldn't stop her from being her true self. Then, one night, I gathered my courage and told her that her behavior had changed and seemed different from before. To my surprise, Elika told me that she had always been this way, but due to some restrictions from her father, she hadn't been able to do everything she wanted. That's when I started wondering if Elika had agreed to marry me just to gain the freedom she desired. However, I didn't voice this concern and convinced myself that she loved me and that her only reason for marrying me was love. That night, I didn't bring it up again and decided to think positively. Later, I realized that Elika had stopped communicating with everyone except one girl named Elena. I knew Elena from before. She was also a girl who had a relationship with a guy and was involved in it. I wasn't particularly happy about their closeness, but I was okay with it. Since I was working long hours and Elika often stayed home alone, I knew that Elena came over to our house during those hours. One time, Elika even asked me if I had a problem with it, and I said I didn't think it was an issue. I stayed calm for about a month and didn't question Elika's behavior. But my calmness didn't last long. One day, I decided to get home early to surprise her and have a romantic evening together. When I arrived and opened the door, I found Elika wasn't there. Instead, Elena was sitting with another guy. I moved closer and was stunned. The guy quickly left the house, almost as if he were running away, while Elena stayed looking scared. I became furious and started shouting, asking what Elena was doing in my house and where my wife was. Without any shame, Elena told me that Elika was at someone else's house with another man. Her words hit me like a bullet to the heart. It felt like everything I had worked for over the years was collapsing on top of me. Then she told me that since I hadn't let the other guy finish what he started, it would be better if I went and finished it myself to calm my anger. I couldn't control myself when I saw her, and in my fury, I didn't think about whether it was right or wrong. I was consumed by her words about my wife. As I was getting involved, Elika contacted Elena, and I realized she was on the phone. I grabbed the phone from Elena's hand and began shouting through the receiver. Without letting her speak, I told her that I no longer wanted to see her and that I was leaving her for Elena. At that moment, Elena's eyes lit up. It seemed like she was secretly wishing for this to happen. I hung up the phone and processed with my actions, continuing to interact with Elena. At that point, I couldn't think about the consequences of my actions or the regrets that might follow. After that, I separated from Elena and went to my room. Elena was still in the house. I was feeling awful, and I couldn't believe that Elika, with her innocent appearance, could be the one to betray me. I decided to take revenge for what she had done. So I told Elena that now that my wife had done this to me, I had decided to marry her instead. At first, Elena was silent and didn't say anything. She didn't even oppose it, and I could tell from her expression that she was agreeing with me. Until Erika arrived and angrily came toward me, shouting that she wouldn't allow me to marry Elena. When I saw Erika threatening me, I told her that if she didn't want to, I would easily leave her and I would tell everyone the real reason behind our separation. Since Erika's family was very strict, especially her father, I knew she wouldn't want him to find out the truth about her life. After I said this, Erika started crying and begging me not to tell her father. Since Erika had completely lost my trust, I told her that we needed to separate quickly and mutually. I even told her directly that after I left her, I would marry Elena. Erika didn't say anything more and Elena left the house. Erika and I were left alone and she cried again, asking for my forgiveness. But since I had trusted her completely and then realized she wasn't the person I thought she was and had taken advantages of my trust, I was deeply hurt. After a few days later, I began the divorce process and I informed my parents that Elika and I had had a falling out and were planning to separate so we wouldn't waste each other's time. Naturally, my family was surprised because we had just gotten married and we had been so in love. It was unexpected that we would want to separate so quickly. My father tried to talk me out of it, asking me to reconsider and continue with my life, but no one knew what was really going on in my heart. After a few weeks, we separated, even though our families tried their best to prevent it. But I was certain that anyone in my position would have made the same decision. Erika left my house and I brought Elena to live with me. I let some time pass before telling my family that I was planning to remarry. This time, my father was angry and said life wasn't a joke, son, that we wouldn't just keep changing partners, loving someone one day and indifferent the next. But I couldn't tell them the real reason, so I had to stand firm and tell them that I had chosen Elena as the love of my life. A few days later, I took Elena to meet my family so they could get to know her better. From the way she looked, it was clear what kind of person she was. That's when my father told me in private that Elena was only getting close to me because of my financial situation. I had been doing well in my business and had 2 jobs, so I had a good income. However, because I wanted to get back at Elika, I felt I had no choice but to marry Elena. I denied what my father said and told him that Elena loved me just like I loved her. Then I married Elena. During this time, Elika visited my family frequently and insisted that they talk to me to try and change my mind. But my mind was made up, and Elena and I went ahead with our marriage. I tried to adjust to this new life with her, until one night, as I was getting closer to Elena, she suddenly turned to me angrily and said that I wasn't a good husband and didn't care about her feelings. Since Erika had never talked about such things and I had always tried to please her, I was taken aback. But Elena continued, saying that if things continued like this, she wouldn't be able to stay with just me and would have to be involved with someone else to make up for the emotional lag I was causing her. Although I wasn't the type to ignore these issues, I realized that Elena was looking for a reason to complain. I didn't feel any love for her anymore, so I wasn't jealous. When she said those words, I just walked away from her and went to sleep. After that, my life with Elena completely changed. From that point, I noticed that Elena was in contact with a younger guy. But I didn't confront her about it, and I didn't care much because by that point I had allowed myself to do the same and engage with others. My behavior changed, and I also started changing my appearance. Even my father warned me a few times and told me he'd noticed I'd been heading down to the wrong path recently. He tried hard to talk to me, but it was no use. Then one day, when I returned home, I saw two men leaving our house. I stormed inside, convinced they had come to see Elena. When she saw my angry expression, Elena confessed and said those men were paying her in exchange for her company. I got upset and told her we didn't need the money since we were financially stable. But then Elena said they paid a lot. I asked how much, and when she told me the amount, I was shocked. I tried again to tell her what she was doing was wrong. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the amount she mentioned. I was tempted. A few days later, I took a deep breath and asked her if men would pay that amount for a guy too. Elena looked at me in surprise and asked if I was serious. I confirmed I was. Elena said that because I was good looking, I'd get a decent amount for it too. With nothing left to lose, I asked her to arrange it for me. After a few nights, Elena said a girl named Mary had chosen me and was willing to pay that sum for an evening together. I cleaned the house, and right on time, Mary arrived, a young but very beautiful girl. I thought to myself, why would a girl this pretty pay for something like this? She came in, and it was clear this wasn't her first time. After a brief introduction, she made the first move, and I went along with it. But during the encounter, I realized that Mary didn't care about her partner's feelings. She was just paying for someone to fulfill her needs. My aim was just to get the money, so I didn't mind. Then one day, Elika showed up again, saying she repented, broken things off with everyone else, and now wanted to be with me alone. But I knew she'd become like Elena, and I couldn't trust her anymore. Me, myself, I had even started becoming like them myself. Then one day, my father unexpectedly came to my house. When I saw him through the people, I quickly hid the girls in room and opened the door. He came in and after a few minutes handed me a piece of clothing and asked whose it was. I was flustered, took it from him without answering and thought that would be the end of it. But then one of the girls who had epilepsy started having a seizure, which caused my father to see the two girls. In that moment, all of my actions were exposed. After we took the girl to the hospital, my father told me that he finally understood why I'd suddenly left Elika and married Elena. He didn't even let me explain and just walked away. That day, I felt terrible and preferred to be alone at the rest of the day. A few days later, I went to see my father and decided to open up to him. I told him the reason I left Elika was because she had betrayed me by allowing her troubled friends into our home. At first, he didn't believe me and thought I was making excuses, but after I explained all the details, he finally admitted that Elika had wronged me. Yet he said my own mistakes couldn't be justified by hers and even told me, even if Elika betrayed you, you shouldn't have become like her by getting involved with other girls. That day, my father told me it would be best to even separate from Elena, and that now that I realize I wasn't mature enough for a committed relationship, I should work on myself and, when ready, find someone genuinely right for me. At the end of his talk, he said he understood from my story that I only married Elena to get back at Elika. So I guess I still have feelings for Elika. I'd never really acknowledged it, though maybe deep down I knew I still loved her and just wanted to deny it. But my father's words made me think. And for a few days, I kept wondering if I still wanted Elika by my side, even knowing that she had betrayed me. Elika still wanted to be with me, saying that her mistake was a one-time thing, influenced by Elena's words, and that she wasn't that kind of person. Some time passed, and I finally left Elena. Even though she tried to stay close to me, I had leverage on her, so she couldn't push too much. She only asked me for some money, which I gave her, and then I started living alone, trying to avoid all other women and control myself, though it was hard. I threw myself into work, went back to studying, and kept my distance from relationships. Meanwhile, Elika stayed in touch with my parents, and knowing that I left, Elena was even more eager to get back together. After a year of being alone, my father finally approached me and said Elika was truly remorseful and had shown she wanted to rebuild her life with me. But I was stubborn and told him I wouldn't give in. My father suggested I think it over, reminding me that if Elika were really a disloyal person, she wouldn't be waiting for me all this time. My father's words got me thinking, so I called Elika and asked if we could meet. She agreed immediately. After such a long time, I was seeing Elika again. She looked more worn down than before and told me how hard it had been for her during our time apart. She had paid the price for a single mistake, something any person could make, and asked me to give her a chance to prove herself. So I suggested we start off as friends to see if she could really avoid repeating the past. We stayed friends for quite a while, and later Alika's father even spoke to me expressing her regret and desire to reconcile. Meanwhile, Elena kept trying to stay in my life with calls and messages. But eventually I made a decision about my future. Elika and I went to counseling together. And following the advice we received, I decided to give our relationship a real chance. This time, we held a wedding ceremony and started living together under one roof. It's been years since then, and Elika has changed, returning to the simple girl she used to be. I, too, became calmer. Gradually, our closeness grew again. Although I had my doubts in the beginning, after she proved herself, we learned to enjoy being together. Over these years, I've realized one thing. We should never justify our mistakes because of someone else's wrongdoing. Just because someone else sinned doesn't mean we should do the same out of revenge. I lost a lot of opportunities because of that desire for revenge. Now we live together and happily, despite the fact that betrayal and emotional wounds are never justified. Sometimes it's worth giving each other a chance because we're all human and can make mistakes, and forgiveness is essential for moving forward in life.